Welcome to Flipping the Table's special series capturing 9 live podcast sessions from the September 26th through the 28th Terra Madre Americas event in Sacramento, California. Over those 3 days, Roots of Change hosted the Slow Meat Pavilion, dedicated to promoting the livestock grazers producing the healthiest and environmentally positive meat. Sacramento's event was the inaugural American version of the famed Italian Terra Madre, founded and hosted biannually in Turin, Italy, by the International Slow Food Organization. Slow food is a movement dedicated to promoting good, clean, and fair food for all. This first episode in the series is titled, We're All Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, Wolves and Grizzlies, the Challenge of Coexistence When Committed to Species Diversity. Watch for 8 more episodes that will drop weekly until January 14th, 2026. These conversations feature the voices and experience of those producing meat using regenerative practices. Enjoy the show.
Hi, it's Michael, and I'm so happy to be introducing the first in this special series from Terra Madre Americas. Our goal over those 3 days was to lift up the voices of individuals who are advancing the regenerative livestock practices that deliver the healthiest, most humanely raised, and most environmentally productive meat you can buy. Thousands of people were able to enjoy the 6 chef demos and tastings, 3 butchery demos, and the series of live audience podcasts that we presented that weekend. It was very memorable and impactful. In the first episode today, you will hear from 3 people on the forefront of learning how to raise livestock while also allowing coyotes, lions, wolves, and grizzlies to coexist. It is a complex challenge, but one critical to healthy ecosystems. The moderator is Dan Imhoff, author of the seminal book Farming with the Wild and the founder of the Wild Farm Alliance. So with that, let's begin, and please enjoy all 9 of these episodes over the next many weeks. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm having flashbacks from 2004 Terra Madre and the International Slow Food kickoff event there. And, time goes fast. You sometimes don't appreciate how important events like these can be, and they really are. So to everybody who has been involved for the many months of planning, well done. Good on you. Today we're talking about livestock and stewardship, livestock raising and stewardship, with 2 amazing ladies from Montana, with slightly different backgrounds, but I think the basic same vision for what they do and for the world. And I think it's a discussion that isn't just related to the West, and it isn't just related to Montana. And it's really getting at a deeper level of, can we coexist with wild nature? Becky Weed and Malou Ramirez, they live in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem of Montana, on different ends of the greater Yellowstone. They've chosen to raise livestock for a living. And in order to do that, and to do it at a high level of stewardship, where you're saying that you're going to do it as best you can, it requires having a dual nature where you love wild nature and you love your animals, and you have to find a way to make that very precarious relationship work. I only know personally watching a coyote take one of my chickens across a field, or a bear completely ripping apart a beautiful tree that, we'd been pruning for many years to give it its form. And at the same time that you have loss, you also have to realize that we're not here alone, and that it would be a much, much poorer world without wild nature and without people like Becky and Malou. I met Becky many years ago when I started to do the research for Farming with the Wild, and I had been part of these discussions with wildlife biologists, conservationists that were trying to piece together these isolated wilderness areas in North America. And they were talking about rewilding the landscapes and definitely with apex predators. At the same time, we were talking with agroecologists, some of the best farming minds in the world. What I found was that the two communities, the rewilding community and the agroecologists, they didn't talk to one another. They were almost perceiving one another as opponents, or they just didn't understand each other's ultimate goals and that they could perhaps come together. So Farming with the Wild was really asking this question: how wild can a farm be, and how much agriculture can take place in a linkage that's linking wild areas and still protect biodiversity? One of the very first people that I talked to was Becky Weed. It was the late 1990s. I believe Becky had started the Predator Conservation Alliance. And I went to her ranch that she owns with her husband, Dave Tyler. I remember, I think there were 3 bald eagles in the tree right at the base of your lane that took us into your property. It was spectacular. And it was many years ago, and I would say, Becky was a very, very amazing spokesperson and steward then. I think 30 years on, though, things are even tougher than they were, perhaps, when Becky started the Predator Conservation Alliance. And what we have are these forces of climate change, of increasing development, increasing recreation, forestry, road building, the defunding of science, almost a public war on predators. I don't know Malou yet, Anderson Ramirez, but from what I read and the short conversations that we have, I'm super, super impressed by her approach to ranching and really making the land her home that she loves and wants to protect. So I think for now, I would like to let Becky and then Malou really have a few minutes to describe your operations and what you do. Yeah, maybe just some initial thoughts on predator-friendly ranching where you live.
Thank you, Dan. I'm Becky Weed. Thanks for coming. One quick correction, Dan, which maybe can help explain a little bit about who I am. I did not start the Predator Conservation Alliance. I was dragged into it by some friends. I'm a tribalist woman. I'm a rancher. I'm a geologist. I'm trained as a natural scientist. But I did work with that group. And at the time, they were beginning to try to start some alternative to the wars between agriculture and conservationists. Malou and I can talk till we're blue in the face about the details of what it means to live with carnivores, and we will do some of that. And I guess I just want to say that after 30 plus years of trying to live with carnivores, we've found some things that work and some things that don't. And I think I would summarize it by saying there is never final reconciliation. There are only arrangements. And that's a quote from a recently published book called Tomorrow is Yesterday. And that book is not about our backyards, it's about conflicts in the Middle East. From my perspective as a rancher, I think we can distill from some guiding principles from that affect Malou and my work every day. And I guess I would summarize it by saying, I'm going to the end first, and then you can get down to the details. I'd summarize it by saying there's 3 guiding principles for me. Nature is the ultimate arbiter. And 2, we exterminate each other and other species at our own peril. And 3 is another quote from that book, and Dan alluded to it, but we'll probably come back to it. And the quote is, this is in reference to the Middle East, but I think it applies to us. Time flies, and then it lands where it started.
I have to follow that. Hello, everyone. I'm Malou. Thanks for having me here. Boy, I echo so much of what Becky just was explaining beautifully. My ranch, our family ranch, borders Yellowstone Park to the north, and so we are raising prey, as my sister-in-law says, right, in the middle of some of the wildest country in the world. And so we believe that we have a greater responsibility as producers to figure out the challenges, or to at least understand the flow of the challenges. So we don't really speak much in solution-based ways. It's more about a better understanding of the wild landscape and how we can fold our agricultural operations into the resilient natural systems that already take place, how we can learn from those systems. And I think ultimately for me, again, we could talk all day long and tomorrow and the next day about all the different tools and techniques. I would agree with Becky that really it's about flow, it's about adapting and not finding something that works and then saying, oh, good, we figured it out. Because once we figure out the grizzly bear situation, it'll be something else, and then it'll be something else. So really about adapting as the landscape changes, as humans change, and as wildlife changes as well. And ultimately, my coexistence idea, and what I always say, is just that we all belong to each other. And that's as simple as it is for me. And that can go from the Middle East to our agricultural operations and to the forest of the GYE and everywhere else. So that's all for now.
I wonder, Becky, again, we'll go to you. Was there some kind of epiphany when you realized that you had to figure out a way to ranch with predators? I remember when we first talked all those years ago, you saying, if I have to kill a lion to stay in business, I need to change my profession. Had you seen a lion kill, or like what made you think that?
What happened to us early on, Dave and I did not grow up on a farmer ranch, but very early in our sheep raising career, we lost 20% of the flock, i.e. 2 animals, probably within 2 weeks of starting. And we did what the neighbors said. We called up Wildlife Services, and they sent in a trapper, and he shot one and he snared one. And Dave and I looked at each other very quickly and said, if this is what we have to do to ranch, we got to do something different. And that really wasn't much of a struggle for us. It took years to figure out the tools. It was almost easier not being part of the local peer group. I was an odd man out anyway. And right now, Dan refers to lions. At the time, it was coyotes. But we've only had 2 spells of really bad mountain lion trouble on our ranch. One was about 15 years ago, and it happened to be right about the time I was asked to go visit Marin County and talk to producers about managing coyotes. And then a few weeks before this conference, we started having really bad trouble with a mountain lion in our neighborhood. And so the take-home lesson is I'm never coming to California again. But to really answer your question, I have sort of an evolution of epiphanies. That first start was when we killed coyotes on our land. But really, it was later, after becoming involved with the Wild Farm Alliance, which emerged from Dan's first Farming with the Wild meeting. And that gave me a chance to talk with other people over a much wider geography, and also to think about my pre-farming career, which was as a geologist. And I see this predator issue as really just kind of a symbolic microcosm of the challenges facing agriculture. So it led me to get involved with broader issues about how we farm, how we manage bison in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, for example. But not even just about animals and livestock. It's about our relationship between agriculture and wildlands writ large. And, it's easy to look at this predator issue as the problem of a privileged few. Malou lives on one of the most spectacular ranches in North America. I live on a place that's much closer to suburbia. But the issues are the same, and I think we have to confront this issue of evolving with ecosystems, whether we're big and grand or whether we're small and humble. So I recognize that for the average American, talking about great big cattle ranches is sort of an abstraction. But talking about learning how to grow vegetables without chemicals and row cover is not. And the fundamental issues are really the same. And that's part of what has kept me going.
And Malou, I think you grew up on the ranch where you live now. were there certain things growing up, certain experiences that really got this ethic into your mind and into your synapses?
Yes, I think when the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in 95, 96, I was in late elementary school, and we were sheep ranchers back then, and we were ranching sheep in a wild place. And so I remember clearly having family meetings about what we should do, and are we being irresponsible by raising sheep in such a wild place neighboring Yellowstone? We were some of the first producers that had substantial loss from the wolves coming back. You know, it was hard when they killed our sheep. It was even harder when they started killing our dogs, and it really hit a different chord. And we had already had coyote problems, so we had sort of been coming up against this. But yeah, I'd say when there were substantial amounts of sheep numbers, things started to shift, and it became a desperate situation. And that's a lot of these producers are in a desperate, reactive place. And so we had a family meeting and decided it was best to get rid of the sheep. We didn't want to, we're choosing to be close to land. We're choosing to be in a wild place because we love the wilds. And so what we didn't want was a sterile landscape where there are no large carnivores. And so we were probably one of the only producers in the area that said, instead of fighting this and being reactive, let's just get rid of the sheep and go back to cows and calves. And then even that evolved over the years. We realized that actually calves are not the best place where we live, that we would watch bison and how they would act and where they would calve. And we would start mimicking some of that with our own cattle in order to reduce that loss. And so we went from cows and calves pairs to now just custom grazing, really great grass-fed beef in a local system where, again, similar to where the bison and how the bison would move out and into the mountains, where they would come and utilize a really amazing food source, be on the go constantly because of predators, because of food source. And we started using that same movement with our cattle. And so now we are custom grazing yearling and 2-year-old grass finished. And they are finishing up in the basin where we have some incredible native grass species. We're utilizing them as a resource to better our soils. And it's just, again, back to the adaptation and evolution instead of, by God, we're going to stay, we are ranchers and we're going to stay here with our sheep and our cattle, and we're going to figure this out. And we have figured it out by adapting and evolving and shifting. So,
yeah, adaptation is probably a daily, monthly, yearly exercise. And I'm sure it can be backbreaking and heartbreaking and life affirming to do that. I mean, I can't imagine what your minds would be like if you didn't have this problem.
Yeah, and I think what we spoke about earlier when we were speaking was, the idea that in a place where I ranch, in this spectacular large place, it's in the mountain. It is spectacular, and it's spectacular because of what the energy comes off of the mountains, and it is that quintessential Northwest Rocky Mountain. And I think it's really important to know that agriculturalists in my part of the world are not trying to make a whole bunch of food for people. We are, whether we know it or not, we are trying to preserve agriculture in a wild place. And so understanding that in order to survive as producers, we have to have a diversified income. If we are producers in a place like the GYE expecting to make all of our revenue through agriculture alone, that is a losing game. And so in order to, again, diversifying wild landscapes, supporting and conserving wild landscapes and coexistence also means supporting and all kinds of diversity, whether it's revenue streams, whether it's people and their opinions. The ultimate devil for us is development. And so what are we trying to preserve and conserve and protect and coexist with if we have no land left to do any of those things? And so it's really important to keep our priorities in check there.
I wonder if you could talk about your diversification, your wool mill, and the many things that you've adapted to over time in addition to raising sheep.
Yeah, as Malou says, adaptation is the name of the game, not just for predator management. It's for everything. And my husband and I did start a wool mill in about 2003, a pretty small scale mill in a big white barn, and using renewable energy, both PV systems and solar thermal, to wash the wool and run the equipment. And about 7 years ago, we sold that business to a woman who lives about 8 years away. We had to add value if we were going to make a living because there's no way we could afford to expand the ranch. But Malou alludes to other issues which have ended up probably consuming more of my time than the predators themselves, although it's all intertwined. I mean, right now, we're just surrounded by paradox. We have one neighbor to our northeast who's a Napa Valley climate refugee who loves his little spot of woods that he's built a giant fence around, and he has game cameras, and he loves watching the mountain lions. We have another neighbor who is married to a woman who grew up in the Tom Miner Basin and whose sister, I think, is one of your neighbors. And they were very much against the wolf reintroduction, but her husband was one of the most progressive and interesting creative legislators in dealing with the wolf in the state government realm. And I happened to be on the board of livestock when part of their cattle herd got infected with brucellosis and had to deal with this bison cattle interaction. And then we have another neighbor who works he's retired now, but he worked as a government contractor and home office work, and he doesn't like to hear dogs bark at night. Actually, both of those neighbors don't like to hear dog barks at night. So after our first successful guard dog died of natural causes, we said, okay, we're not going to get another guard dog, and we've lived with that for about 12 years. But now our recent mountain lion crisis has arrived. We've lost almost 10 animals. And right now we're having to bring the animals in at night, which is not a solution for land management. So we are my husband is 82 years old and I'm 66, and we're about to go get a new guard dog in order to keep our sheep flock going for the next generation of young producers that we're trying to work with. So really, if I were to describe my mission now, it's not really centered on carnivores, although my convictions on that haven't changed. My mission is to set up our farm for this group of young people that we've been working with for the last several years, set it up so that they can each continue with their enterprises in cropping and livestock and have a way to manage that land, but not be forced to pay the insane real estate prices that now plague the Gallatin Valley. So I think you kind of get the message. Malou and I are as concerned about two-legged carnivores as we are about four-legged carnivores.
I wonder if we can talk dogs for a little bit. How important are dogs to your operation, and what kind of dog are you looking for, Becky, and why? What makes a really good guard animal in terms of like grizzlies, wolves, lions?
We've had guard dogs since the mid-90s. We just got 2 new pups, and we were trying to remember what numbers they are, and there's something like 20 and 21. We're experimenting now with a cross between Great Pyrenees and Akbash. Great Pyrenees and Anatolian Shepherds. And they've just always been a pivotal piece of our whole area. We started with sheep, so we would have lots of guard dogs with our sheep. We'd have 5 or 6 at a time. It was highly successful. And when we got rid of the sheep, we kept the guard dogs, because then we started to have this phenomenon now that we have a large amount of grizzly bears where we live, a substantial amount of grizzly bears. So wolves are really not the problem for us, or should I say the challenge, because grizzly bears are the big man on campus. And it was important for us, being a big ranching family with a lot of kids, that these guard dogs then sort of took the role as headquarter protectors. And I am a big fan of canine energy, of having dogs in places, in wild places where there are people. There's a reason why people and dogs have a ancient relationship, and it was actually created out of protection and food. And so it makes sense for us. It's always worked for us. We've lost a lot of guard dogs, sadly, and so loss is always one of those things you have to deal with dogs in wild places. But we will never not have guard dogs where we live, because we have grizzly bears in our yard. I used to be able to tent camp in my yard, and my children cannot do that anymore. And it feels really good knowing we have our guard dogs out there. They're beloved family members, and it's hard to see them go. And unfortunately, most of them do not die of old age. That was a good thing, a beautiful thing. But they're pivotal and extremely important, I think. And I will say that the opposite also is true. You can't just have chaotic dog energy. That actually brings in conflict. And my dad really speaks to that a lot. So the importance of a dog team that are well trained instinctually and work well together and with the people are really important. You can't just having a bunch of dogs running around actually is the opposite effect. And that's a really important piece of it.
So does that mean that a great guard dog can't be a pet?
I think a good guard dog can be a pet, but you have to be really careful about that threshold.
Yeah.
We used to raise guard dogs. We were never allowed to go into the barn and pet the pups. That was the hardest thing we could do as kids, these little fluffy white things in the barn. And we would always sneak it. When my parents left the ranch, that's when we'd go and just let pups come all over us. So it's really, I think it's important, especially when they're protecting humans. They need to know what they're protecting in the headquarters.
What kind of dog are you looking for, Becky?
Well, the dog we had before was also a cross, Pyrenees, Maremma, and Anatolian, and he was a really interesting mixture of fierce but not too fierce. We live in a place where dogs have to be able to be around little kids they haven't met before, and I think it's a bit of a myth that guard dogs shouldn't be socialized. They should be socialized, but they need to live with their animal peers. But like everything else, they're really individuals. The dogs we're looking for now, it's a breed from Bulgaria, and I had heard from a biologist who started to try to import them about 13 years ago. Couldn't do it. Somebody else finally got it done, and so there's a woman in Idaho who's raising them with 1,000 sheep and other dogs. So, and their claim to fame is that they don't bark a whole lot, so I'm hoping I can coexist with my neighbors. But one of the really interesting things to me, we, like many people who get guard dogs, had to have a few tries before we really found success. And it's a long and painful story because getting a dog is like buying a child. It's a commitment. But this dog that we did end up with was so successful, and I think part of the reason why he was this very weird mixture of wild and domestic. And two things happened that really struck me. One time it was during lambing season, and I had gone and brought some lambs in early. And then the sheep went back out, but the dog wouldn't come. He wouldn't stay with the sheep. He kept going back out to the field until finally he drew me out there, and he was standing over a lamb between his four legs, looking up at a tree where there was a bald eagle. And he persisted until he could somehow get the message through my thick skull that I needed to pay attention. And then another time, it was in late June, the grass was tall, and the sheep were out back, and I went to feed him his evening meal. And I was coming down a hill, looking down at the dog and the sheep in quite a distance, and I realized that Max was out playing with a white-tailed fawn. And he looked up and he saw me, and he put his paw and sort of patted the fawn back down into the tall grass, and then ran over to where I was and greeted me and ate his dinner. And I walked back up, and as I got back up 2/3 of the way up the field, I looked back, and he was going back to the spot to continue playing with that fawn. And the story in and of itself isn't terribly significant, but I think it sort of describes what I hope for in a guard dog. So I'm kind of frustrated that we haven't been able to have a guard dog. It was really nice to not be tied down in that way, but when it works that way, it really feels right.
That's a beautiful story. You also told me recently, though, that there's kind of a new interspecies dog-wolf hybrid that is beginning to vex livestock people in the West.
Yeah, this is a really interesting problem that I don't think is very well understood. As I said before, we usually haven't had lion trouble. We have pretty much a constant presence of coyotes and foxes. And of course, there's a few domestic dogs that generally haven't given us trouble. But about 2 years ago, we started having trouble from an animal. I got many chances to see it. It was way bigger than a regular coyote. Kind of looked like a coyote, but it was a little bit odd. And then I got a picture, and I realized it had some black coloration, which is not normal for a coyote. And I showed this picture. It wasn't a great photo, but it was decent. I showed it to about 4 different experts, a very well-known federal wolf biologist, a state wolf biologist, a wildlife services trapper, and a couple of friends who are wildlife ecologists and ranchers. And I think I got 6 different answers. Some people thought it was just a coyote. Some people thought it was a wolf-dog hybrid. Some people thought it was a coyote-dog hybrid. I've learned a lot since then. I collect some hair samples, but realized that if you don't get some flesh, you only get the matriarchal line. And I've had a lot of discussions with the biologists because what they're finding in Europe is that there's quite a bit of wolf-dog hybridization because the populations of people are so intimately close to the introduced wolves. And it's really almost an existential threat to wolf reintroduction in some places because these hybrid animals don't behave like regular wild animals. They don't have very much fear of humans. And I've learned in my discussions with various scientists that some of the agency people don't really want to know the answer. I've talked to trappers who say, oh yeah, we know there's hybrids all over the place. When I talk to the professional scientists, they say there aren't really very good data on the DNA story. So I think this is a work in progress. There certainly is some hybridization going on. And I have certainly had people who are in favor of our predator-friendly approach, but think we ought to just kill these hybrids immediately. It's again maybe a metaphor for some of the complexities we're seeing in human populations right now. And again, there are no easy answers, but stay tuned. I think people are starting to learn a little bit more.
Malou, can you talk a little bit about the grizzlies on your property and on your ranch and how they flow through the ranch, maybe on a seasonal basis, and when you have to be most concerned?
Sure. Yes, thank you. And the seasonality approach to coexistence is a really important one. That's part of that flow, understanding that some tools work better in different seasons and depending on the carnivore. So we are dealing with a phenomenon that is bringing grizzly bears down into their native lands long before they went back up into the forest. Grizzly bears were originated on prairie land, which was why they do things like bluff charge instead of other things. That's the only way they can protect themselves. And so because of climate issues and changing food sources, they are now coming back down into these historic lands. And so now humans are on that land as well. And so we have both residential grizzly bears and traveling grizzly bears through who are trying to disperse their genetics. And there's something about Tom Miner Basin. In indigenous culture, Tom Miner was a place that was called something like the land of plenty. And so one of the unique situations about Tom Miner Basin is that our challenges on landscape really center around abundance instead of scarcity. So we have a lot of everything. We have a lot of willow lines and incredible water where it headwaters into the Yellowstone River. We have the absolute perfect habitat for grizzly bears. And then on top of it, now there is this non-native plant that came in probably in gravel trucks doing construction on ranches called caraway. And we're all familiar with caraway. It's edible, it's delicious, it's all the things that we people love. And because grizzly bears and humans are so similar, they're also enjoying it and they're eating the root. And they're eating the root right now while they're in hyperphagia, while they're trying to gain as much weight as they can before they hibernate. And so right now on the ranch, we're seeing, or in the basin and on the ranch, we're seeing 10 to 20 grizzly bears a day. And they'll be anywhere from 10 yards from the horse corrals to out in the fields. And it is unbelievable. And it's also bringing in many, many tourists because the rangers in Yellowstone Park tell people to go into Tom Miner Basin to see grizzly bears instead if they have not seen one. And this is a one-way dirt road up into the mountains that you have to come back through, all rural ranching community, private lands. And so it's the big challenge is the people and trying to keep conflict low or mitigated with the people aspect of the grizzly bear situation. And so right now, if you were to go to my house and to our ranch, there would be today's Friday, there would be 50 to 70 cars parked alongside of our dirt road watching the grizzly bears. And, kids out with their parents, with a mom and her cubs, a sow and her cubs, 20 yards away. It's a substantial situation. And it's the people that we're concerned about. The bears, it is a concern, but it is what it is, and the bears the bears know what they're doing, and they're okay. And it's something that we're constantly having to deal with, and so again, back to coexistence and conflict reduction. I mean, it's not just in wild places. It's mainly with people. Actually, it's mainly with people.
So important. There's a lot of different tools that have been developed over the many years. I think I read about these tags, so you can tag the cows and basically track them and get a lot of data about the cows. I'm sure some of the grizzlies are tagged as well, and the wolves, and they're being tracked. You do range riding, right? So observation is quite an important part of your operation, and I was talking with Becky, just before she got here, and she's been sleeping in her truck out trying to protect the flock. So can you talk a little bit about range riding and observation and who's involved in that?
Yeah, so we do have many different tools and techniques through the Tom Miner Basin Association, which is an educational ranching community that we just experiment with different tools and techniques and seasonality. Range riding is by far our most successful one, and range riding looks different every landscape, on every operation, but the main idea of range riding is to be the consistent human presence out on landscape. And in a way that is not dominating or imposing, it's more about folding into a story that is already taking place. And when we fold ourselves into a story and observe and are aware and collect data, we have a better understanding of the natural systems around us. And so just in that better understanding helps us not be reactive, helps us be proactive and ready for whatever might occur. And it also shows that the wilds and the more than humans we're there too. And part of my coexistence thing is I want you to thrive, grizzly bear. I want you to survive. And I also want you to want me to survive and to thrive. And so if we're all out there utilizing and using land in different ways and present with each other, we understand each other better. And so our range riders are also there to find carcasses really quickly, domestic carcasses. So when there is an animal that's been killed by a wolf or a grizzly bear in the Northwest, she was saying there's a livestock loss program, there's a compensation program that we get paid for those losses by government money. And so we need to find those carcasses immediately. And in a place like Tom Miner Basin, one of the wildest places in the world, we have to find those carcasses within about 8 to 10 hours, or else they're too far gone to actually get a compensation from Wildlife Services. So our range riders are also out, deeply trained people, incredible horsewomen, horsemen, who have a very trusting relationship and keep themselves safe in a wild place and finding those carcasses so that those producers can get reimbursed, which then hopefully widens the platform of tolerance and success in these operations.
We're too small to have range riders, so it mostly involves me going around the perimeter of our small ranch, often peeing at the fence line. Malou was telling me today, though, about how there are some people who have figured out that if they purchase synthetically made male mountain lion urine, that it can often, because of their territorial habits, it can often be good at repelling mountain lions coming in past that boundary. So that's a new tool for me. In general, I think the most interesting observation for me over the years is that I know the animals are observing me all the time. And one time, back when we were having trouble with mountain lions years ago, we also noticed that there was a 3-legged coyote around. It had been apparently caught in a trap west of us. And one time during this period, my husband went upstairs in the second floor of the house and watched me as I did the morning circuit. And he saw this coyote laying down in a swale in our back field from quite a distance. And the coyote saw me coming, lay down in that divot in the ground, watched me go by, and then after I went by, it got up and trotted off to do its daily thing. And I think it is not really a coincidence that over the years, if I have left for a meeting, that's usually when we have our rare occurrences of predation. And so with that Malou spirit in mind, I think the coyotes around us have kind of figured out that we don't shoot them. And there is quite a bit of research to demonstrate that with coyote populations, if you exploit them and start killing them, then there's a tendency for the females to have more pups in a litter and higher success rate for the pups that are born. So with coyotes at least, if we get to know each other, we can develop an understanding. We don't yet fully understand what's going on with the mountain lions, but I do know, I talked to a houndsman who has become part of a group of people who for a hobby go up and they tree the mountain lions so they can get cool pictures, which is kind of neat, and they literally know the individuals. He practically has names for the ones that are killing our sheep. And that's interesting, but I think it may also be contributing to the habituation of wild animals to being close to people. The last animal that got killed was less than 200 yards from our house. And there's another thing going on. The first time we had lion trouble, there had been a disease that went through the mule deer population. That population crashed, so the cats came out of the mountains and down into the valley. We're pretty close to the mountains, but we're not in the mountains. But this time around, there is not a disease in the mule deer population, but there's a different kind of disease. One of the nearby ranchers sold a bunch of beautiful foothill terrain. There's now probably 5 or 6 mansions that have built up on the top of this alluvial fan. And at least one neighbor is pretty sure that that has contributed to the mountain lions coming out of the hills and coming down into where people live. Without even ascribing value judgments to what the mountain lion's opinion is of us, we certainly are disturbing their eating habits.
We're getting close to the end of our conversation. I want to thank you a lot. I don't know if anyone has a question from the audience for Becky or Malou. They're going to be here throughout the day. You can find them. I'm sure that they can talk for hours about almost anything. I think Michael has a question.
So both of you live in a very impressive place when it comes to this interaction between wild nature and livestock. I'm curious about the uptake among other ranchers in the Montana environment in the West, let's say the Rockies. Are you seeing more and more ranchers, producers of livestock, embracing your ethic?
Definitely, yes. Thankfully, there have been some cracks in probably the food system, which is why we're all here right now, that have exposed a lot of hard truths. And so that could be as simple as, ranchers need to stay on the land and they can't go bankrupt. And so producers are realizing that this movement will help them. And so it's no longer political and, old stubbornness. It's now, I'm seeing a shift in some open minds, which is really amazing. There's still those ones, but they have children, hopefully, and let's see if it'll keep going in the right direction.
Yeah, I can echo that. I think that, when the wolf reintroduction got going, it was extremely political, and ranchers were at the head of the anti-wolf movement and extremely vocal. But things have changed somewhat. Montana and Idaho and Wyoming have not suddenly all become wolf lovers, but really the conflict is more with hunters. There are still many vocal ranchers, but there's a lot of ranchers who are quietly using predator-friendly tactics. They may not be 100% predator-friendly, and I don't have a problem with that. But what I found when I was more activist on this issue was that there was a lot of quiet ranchers who just wanted to solve the damn problem, and they found they could do it better if they had 24/7 help. In some cases, that's a dog. In other cases, they would hire a range rider, and then they would figure out that they could manage their heifers differently from their mother cow-calf pairs, or they would put yearlings into a certain area, and they really didn't want the headlines of the newspapers talking about them. So the ranchers who are most progressive on this front are often people who kind of avoid the media, except for when there's really good spokesmen like Malou and her family. So it's like so many things in our politics. I think that the opinion at a grassroots level is often not what we read about in the newspaper. And I think we have to be really careful about reminding ourselves about that on many fronts.
Well, you've just heard from 2 fantastic stewards, and I hope that you'll seek them out if you have more questions and find out more about their stories. Malou and Becky, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the first segment in our special Flipping the Table series, sharing the live audience podcast from September's Terra Madre Americas. Next week, you will hear Michael's conversation with Wade Crowfoot, Secretary of California's Natural Resources Agency, in which they explore California work to support land stewardship in the future. Finally, we'd like to thank our primary Terra Madre Americas sponsors, Good Earth Natural Foods, Tomcat Ranch Educational Foundation, Harvest Path, and Richards Regenerative. Thank you for listening.